A couple of people have said recently that the volume of reading in the modules is a little bit daunting, and I don't think that that means that there are too many words or too many pages, just that they're not sure what the reading is for, or maybe they're struggling to understand the full scope of what it is that I'm inviting you to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about wicked problems and try to keep this pretty short, but bear with me and there'll be a Kahoot just for fun mostly when we're finished. So the definition of a wicked problem, of course, is one that doesn't have easy solutions, that is intertwined into the fabric of society in multiple ways, and despite people's best efforts, just resists being uh, solved in some ways. Homelessness is one that you've probably thought some about and seen some in the readings. Um, Mental health, the rise in suicide rates in southern Idaho, for example, uh, in the last several years is something of a wicked problem. There's lots of concern about why young people, particularly, are more prone to be tempted to take their own lives. Um, I thought that maybe we could talk just a little bit about why would we even worry about a wicked problem if it's intractable, if it's unsolvable. Well, think about it in terms of the starfish analogy that you've probably heard sometimes. A man's walking along the beach and he's picking up starfish and throwing them back into the ocean. Um, and somebody says to him, you'll never be able to make a dent in the problem. There are too many starfish, and it won't make any difference. And the man stoops down and picks up another starfish and throws it back into the ocean, and then says, made a difference to that one. So I think that's my approach to it, is to think about it as drops in the ocean and making a difference one person or one little thing at a time. Okay? So I'm going to talk for just a minute about a wicked problem that would like to address, and that is the decline of reading. Um, as I have taught literature over the years at CSI and other places, I hear pretty frequently that people, when they were young, say elementary school age, young elementary school age, that they really did like to read, and they read a lot. And then something happened along in middle school, maybe, or later into high school or whatever, and they no longer felt like reading. That reading, the joy of reading had gone out of it. The joy had gone out of reading for them. So, why do I care about that? Well, if you look behind me, you see all those books that represent hundreds and hundreds of stories and ideas and experiences and knowledge about people and things, places, ideas that I would not have any access to except through reading. I suppose I could have access to some things through the internet, but it's not the same as um, diving deep into, say, for example, one person's experience of the Holocaust. Um, Art Spiegelman's Maus, which is a graphic novel about the Holocaust, is about his parents' experiences and about his experience talking to his father about those experiences. And it's a deep dive in one narrow place that a broad search about the internet, a broad search about the Holocaust on the internet wouldn't get you there. And besides that, it represents Jews as mice and Nazis as cats and Americans as dogs, and plays with all those kind of metaphors that you might imagine come along with that. So why has interest in reading gone down? Or why do I think that it's gone down? Or why does it seem to have gone down? I think that there are several things. Probably primary among them is bad experiences in school. And I guess I'm thinking about that as a question to you all that you can answer if you want to. You can contact me directly or post a reply to this or get in touch some other way. But um, accelerated reading, sometimes called AR, I think is part of the problem, even though it was intended to help students get into books and increase reading. I think it actually takes enjoyment out of it because it instrumentalizes it. That is to say, it turns it into a means to an end instead of the end itself. So, how many of you, when you finished your AR goal, got to go to a pizza party? Well, the pizza was the end, the reading was the means, and having a reward for reading changes the dynamic for why we do it. One of the things that Ed Deci says in his book, Why We Do What We Do, is that rewards tend to diminish our desire to do things, not increase our desire. And that seems counterintuitive, but there's plenty of research to back it up. That if you give people rewards for completing puzzles, for example, they tend to prefer the easier puzzles because it's a more direct path to the reward. But if you set up an experiment where people are able to choose what kinds of puzzles they work on, they will, and don't give them rewards, but help them, suggest to them or give them feedback or input that suggests that the puzzles are enjoyable for their own sakes, then people tend to choose the more difficult puzzles. And they report higher levels of satisfaction with doing the puzzles. So I think something similar is going on with reading. I also think that, of course, things like, let's see, where's my phone? Things like digital devices are a problem. Um, Not because the content on them is necessarily bad, although it can be. Uh, it can be derogatory, it can be hate inducing, it can cater to the lowest common denominator in human connections. But because it is so accessible and the brain chemicals are so easy to activate, um, a post that gets a like or um, something along those lines is a little bit of a, and I don't remember if it's dopamine or I think it's dopamine. That's a little bit of a dopamine hit, and then you pursue that little bit of a dopamine hit over and over and over, and hours can go. I don't have to explain this. You know what I'm talking about. You know that this happens. I think there's also a little bit of a distrust of literacy, a distrust of higher education, maybe a little bit of or a lot, a distrust of book learning. Being in higher education and Idaho, particularly, and other states like Idaho, there is some pushback that says, there's all kinds of smarts, and you shouldn't discount what people learn outside of school. And so I try really hard not to discount what people learn outside of school. But I can't deny that having read these hundreds of books, um, I have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of, I hope, empathy that I wouldn't have otherwise. Now, that doesn't make my knowledge or my experience or my learning superior to anyone else's, but it is different and it is only accessible in the practice of sustained long form reading. So when you see TLDR, TL semicolon DR, too long didn't read, and then someone summarizes, like that's not a bad thing, I suppose. But then you're relying on the person who did the summarizing to understand the content of what it is that you've read, or that they have read, rather, and that you didn't read. So this feels like an intractable, wicked problem that I don't know what to do about. So why would I work in this area? Why would I do this? Well, that's a good question. I think primarily because of my profession and my desire to um, open up the possibility that reading is reaccessible. That's not a very good way of saying it. Let me try again. That people can recapture a love of reading. There's a whole bunch of evidence and a whole bunch of research that suggests that reading is a primary function of developing some of the higher order thinking that enable us to do higher education. Certainly, the ability to read is crucial for forming some kinds of knowledge. And so it just seems important to me. So, what am I going to do? Well, I'm reading. This is a book that is by a scholar who previously wrote an in-depth analysis of what reading does to the brain. In fact, the previous book is called Proust and the Squid. And this one is a follow-up that said, okay, now hey, there's all that research about what reading does to the brain. Now let's talk about what happens to the reading brain in the world where everything's on a device. And where we and our children are constantly bombarded by media that intends to keep us on the devices and discourage us from certain kinds of thinking and action. So this video is too long already, so I'll wrap up. But this is an example of a wicked problem, and some of the dimensions of it that I'm inviting you to think about with regard. I guess what I'm saying is that as you think about the wicked problem that you have started to select, if you haven't selected one yet, it's okay. But if you've thought about some of the dimensions like this, you'll be in a good place to start working on the problem. And it isn't a matter of solving the problem once and for all. It's more about making a difference for one starfish.